Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, finally, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Laura Marling, titled Short Movie. Man, it took me way too long to get to this album. Now, some of this I can easily brush aside or blame on a turbulent month and a hefty back catalog, but I argue there's more to it in this case, so I think some explanation about my schedule is required here. Now, before I review any sort of album, I go back and listen through their entire back catalog. Not just the singles, not just the hits, the entire list of records and albums they put out. And I also endeavor to be an active listener too. I'm the sort of, if there are oblique or confusing lyrics, I'm gonna go digging through them line by line to truly parse all of them out. And that tends to require a lot of listens. Coupled with the fact that I still try to get out multiple reviews every single week, plus Billboard breakdown, plus work a full-time job. Well, yeah, I'm not gonna complain about that. You all get the picture. And a lot of this comes down to the singer-songwriter that we're gonna be talking about today. A critically acclaimed artist whose knack for intricate and mature lyricism meant that her work didn't just merit additional listens, it demanded it. Yep, we're gonna be talking about Laura Marling today, the sort of folk singer-songwriter that I have a hard time not liking. Not just for her literary sensibility, but for the fact that she brought a level of maturity and songwriting craft that seemed beyond her years. And as her songwriting ventured more towards abstraction and layers, her material got a lot trickier to process and understand. Her first creative peak for me came on her second album, I Speak Because I Can, which recruited Marcus Mumford to contribute to a record that not only outstripping anything he did with Mumford & Sons easily, but also had strong enough melodic grooves and writing to stand out as one of the best albums of 2010. Her 2011 album, A Creature I Don't Know, is a little bit trickier to gauge given its slightly more abstract writing, but was still incredibly solid because the writing was so damn good even despite being abstract, and it wasn't afraid to get noisier and nastier deeper into the record like cuts like The Beast, which kicked all amounts of ass. Then came Once I Was an Eagle in 2013, a record that dipped into even greater abstraction with even less instrumental accompaniment, and one that took so many listens for me to really parse out and understand. And yet, I still argue that as a songwriter, Marling had never sounded better. An album that felt transitional only in that she was stepping towards something new and dropping an air of finality on what came before. So when I heard that she was releasing a new album that apparently featured electric guitar, which was a real first for her, I was excited about this. After Once Was an Eagle, a new beginning kind of felt inevitable, so even though it took me a long time to get here, what did we get with her newest record, Short Movie? Well, here's the thing. Another reason this review is as late as it is that for the first time, I had a real hell of a time getting a handle on this record, even despite arguably being less abstract than Once Was an Eagle. After listen, I think I've come to the conclusion that while I do really like many of the themes that Laura Marling explores on Short Movie, and I definitely would not call this album bad, I do think it's a slight step back from her best, and overall doesn't quite seem as distinctive and memorable as some of her best songs. In other words, it's a damn good album, but not quite a great one. Now, if you're familiar with Laura Marling, her general vocal presence and sound hasn't changed all that much. She still sounds effortlessly soulful, fiery, but very tempered with a maturity that easily seems beyond her years. A girl who has seen and done too much in too little time, and might struggle to carry that weight, but still carries it all the same. It should be noted that while all of her albums do frame her as being affected by the lives she touches, this album paradoxically shows both more disaffection and vulnerability, with some of the tracks like Strange and Short Movie and Gurdjieff's Daughter giving her more of a clipped sing-talk delivery that actually brings a nice feistiness to the song, which is actually pretty charming. And more songs showing her more wounded or fearful or sorrowful, showing off her more of her dramatic range. Now, throughout the course of this album, she's a little bit more restrained on some of her delivery and on average in comparison with previous records, with the exception of a couple high points like on Walk Alone, where you can tell that she was just pushing her voice to the limit and it kind of sounded a little painful. But you know what, come on, there's a reason this girl has been compared to Joni Mitchell as much as she has, and to some extent, she earns it. And one of the reasons that she's earned that comparison has been in the lyrics and the themes that she's explored, most of which she's touched on before in other albums, but with a newer framing device for Short Movie. The details are still pretty sparse. Whatever you do get fragments in order to set the scene, they stand out in vivid relief and let the imagination fill in the blanks. But where Marling has always stood out is her framing and her poise. You can buy her words because she's got the wisdom and the common sense to know exactly what the consequences would be of her actions, and have already seen all the worst down the road, either in her own choices just to be alone, or involve herself in relationships where she almost expects to be disappointed. Take the song Strange, where it appears that she's involved with a fling with a married man who sounds like he's going going through a midlife crisis isn't only really opening his eyes to the world through her, and yet she's very cautious on the song, warning him to stay away, reminding him of his wife and family, and how taking the world through her will end up hurting them both in the end if she falls for him. Or take I Feel Your Love, how she fell for this guy, and to have him invest so much in her as she does in him, even though for her it's partially a defense mechanism against loneliness in the wider world, and yet in the end she knows she has to walk away from all of it. Courtney Barnett wishes she could have Laura Marling's maturity and ability to make tough choices in her music, or even make bad choices but paint them in such starkly human tones, such universal tones that empathy for her becomes effortless. She might not have a lot of tact in some of her words, but I definitely appreciate her blunt brand of honesty. That works for me. But the framing device of this album where things get truly intriguing into exploring some of the main themes of this album. The split between very stark individualism and companionship, finding transcendence on a lonely road or solace in another, and in a warped twist that flies in the face of most conventional expressions, Laura Marling finds far more security in just being on her own, even as her closest friends seem to drift away or not live up to her standards. And you know what? That makes a certain amount of sense. The philosophies of George Gurdjieff are referenced all throughout this album, and while in some ways it might seem a little bit trite, at least to me, advice steeped in evolving mysteries that honestly kind of feel a little bit bogus, the transcendence through passions does add a certain thrill to tracks like Divine that I really liked. And what I love about this album is that the framing is perfect. Laura Marling presents situations in plain language without any bias, and doesn't pretend that her lone wandering is perfect, or all that she needs to do is have love to keep her strong. There's a lot of fear that comes with being on your own. The lone horse might be wounded by every warrior attempting to ride her or hold her back and down, sketch visceral language on the song Warrior, but it's where she knows deep down she only has herself to really rely on at this point. For whenever she does interact with people, she's sick of the lies and the masks and the indecisive lack of passion, which even she does have at some points herself, even as she does crave that companionship in the end, which is why Easy comes as a moment of respite with my favorite lyric on the entire album. Well, you can't be lost if you're not in your own. You can't be found if you're not all alone. More than anything though, this album focuses on knowing yourself despite those who would confine you, whether you're with another or you're on your own. And if it feels messy and meandering getting to that point, kind of intentional because it is very human. I get where she's coming from there and I like the way it's framed. So okay, if I have so much to praise for Laura Marling's lyrics and themes that she might have explored before or even explored better on earlier albums, but there's enough uniqueness to her framing to excuse it, I'll give that a pass. Where are the problems here? Well, believe it or not, I think it comes through in some of the instrumentation. Not that it's bad. Her choice to incorporate more electric guitar to add backing texture is inspired in the replacement of reverb to add depth and mass to the mix to make the songs feel heavier and busier, and honestly it works really well, but it can feel a little bit thin and bare bones as the album goes on, especially in the back half. For as much as Marling writes some great hooks and beautiful melodies, the ominous haze of Warrior, the more aggressive picking of False Hope, the fantastic acoustic texture and Strange, the distant watery guitars on Don't Let Me Bring You Down, Howl and Worship Me, there's an odd listless tone to much of this album that makes it feel a fair bit longer than it actually is. I'll admit, I've always liked Marling's material with a little bit more groove or muscle to it, and you'd think that pushing her material into more vulnerable territory would spark a little bit more raw energy or passion, or at least a little bit more variance in the acoustic tracks to drive more momentum, but for the most part it's fairly sparse, lacking in some of the truly killer instrumental moments that have stood out to me so well on her earlier albums. In other words, for as much as I can appreciate the quality and emotion of this record and how well it's presented lyrically, instrumentally doesn't always grip me in the same way, which makes it a fair bit harder to really parse out. It's not an album that will grab you, it's one that has to grow on you. In any case, let me stress that I really do like this album, but I don't love it, no matter how much I want to love it. In comparison with her contemporaries, Laura Marling isn't quite as harrowing or visceral as Sharon Van Etten, as ramshackle or intimate as Hooray for the Riff Raff, as sorrowful and as Licky Lee, as powerfully anthemic and melodic as Florence and the Machine or First Aid Kit, or as quirky or off-kilter as Vienna Tang or Regina Spektor. But there's a certain purity and universality with Laura Marling that she gets with her brand of very simple songwriting that I can find very gripping and beautiful. And I find her maturity and bluntness a lot more compelling than whatever Courtney Barnett or Lana Del Rey put on display. To some extent, this album does feel transitional, and given the entire album seems to focus on the idea of transition and evolution within oneself, it works for what it is. Now, for me, it's a strong 7 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation, especially if you like any of the artists that I just mentioned. Otherwise, while I might not be the biggest fan of stripped down acoustic minimalism, Laura Marling, she's one of the women doing it right. So definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I know this review is so late, but as I said, crazy schedule, and I got the impression it's only gonna get crazier. But if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.